In 2019, 18-year-old Lauren Showers was working on a bridge in Montana when the forklift he was driving plunged roughly 50 feet and came crashing right on top of him. He remained conscious as the machine crushed his pelvis and lower body and mangled his right forearm so badly it had to be amputated. Doctors ultimately gave him a brutal choice: die from his injuries or undergo a hemicorporectomy, an extremely rare operation that removes everything below the waist. Despite doctors repeatedly fearing he wouldn't make it, Lauren chose the surgery and survived. He later recovered enough to leave the hospital and marry his girlfriend Sabia, despite living with the permanent effects of the accident, including recurring kidney infections. In 2016, Colleen Lee donated one of her kidneys to save the life of her boyfriend after his kidney function dropped below 5%. Just months later, he admitted he had cheated on her during a trip to Las Vegas. Colleen forgave him and gave the relationship another chance, only for her boyfriend to eventually break up with her over the phone. Despite losing both the kidney and the relationship, she later said she didn't regret the donation, explaining, "Saving someone's life, I could never regret that." After her close friend died in 2022, Emily Watlington discovered a heartwarming image on Google Street View showing the two of them dancing together on a sidewalk, a moment neither of them even knew had been captured. She found the photo the following year and shared it with the caption, "We are dancing together forever," on Google Maps. In November of 2025, 33-year-old Russian model Angelika Tartanova was brutally beaten after reportedly trying to end her 6-month relationship with millionaire construction businessman Dmitry Kuzmin. She was abandoned with catastrophic head injuries and survived only after a passerby found her. Doctors had to remove a large portion of her skull to relieve swelling, and the brain damage left her unable to speak for months, with lasting problems affecting her memory and coordination. Even more disturbingly, Kuzmin allegedly used her phone for about a week afterward, sending messages to her friends pretending she was fine while she lay critically injured. The 42-year-old was eventually charged with attempted murder and faced up to 8 years in prison, but reportedly died of a heart attack before he could serve a sentence. Tartanova survived and has undergone extensive rehabilitation and reconstructive treatment. This is exactly why you should never drive onto a railroad crossing while the lights are still flashing. After waiting for a train to pass, this driver saw the crossing arms rise and assumed it was safe to proceed. But the warning lights never stopped flashing, and as he drove onto the tracks, the gates suddenly came back down, trapping his van between the barriers. At this point, he could have easily driven through one of the gate arms since they're designed to break away in these types of emergencies. But instead, he appeared to panic and began attempting a K-turn to avoid the tracks. With every second wasted, another train was rapidly approaching. The driver repeatedly maneuvered back and forth, desperately trying to reposition himself as the train closed in. By the time he realized he wasn't gonna make it, there was nowhere left to go. Soon enough, the train arrived and slammed into the van at high speed, sending debris everywhere. Remarkably, the driver survived after learning exactly what not to do at a railroad crossing. This was the moment a group of hikers found themselves just inches away from a wild black bear after it suddenly emerged from the woods and began approaching them. But instead of running, screaming, or making any sudden movements, the group remained completely still. Wildlife experts normally recommend making a lot of noise and appearing large if a black bear ever becomes aggressive, but this bear just seemed curious instead of violent, so the hikers decided not to do anything that might startle it. For nearly a minute, the bear continued closely observing the group while they remained frozen in place. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the animal soon lost interest and wandered away, leaving the hikers unharmed after one of the most nerve-wracking wildlife encounters ever caught on camera. One of the women ended up taking this epic selfie to memorialize the horrific situation. She waited 63 years for the love of her life to return home. In 1950, U.S. Army Sergeant Joseph Gant went missing during the Korean War, and his wife Clara was told only that he may have been taken prisoner. Refusing to give up hope, she never remarried and kept a light burning on her porch for more than 6 decades, telling everyone she was still waiting for Joe. Finally, in 2013, his remains were identified and returned to Los Angeles in a flag-draped coffin. At 94 years old, Clara stood weeping as she welcomed him home, her lifelong vigil ending in both heartbreak and closure. This was the last photo taken of 31-year-old Landre Sylvester in July of 2021, as he walked out of Cook County Jail after posting bail, unaware it would be his final steps. Just minutes after his release, multiple gunmen leaped from 2 cars and opened fire in a calculated ambush, riddling his body with up to 64 bullets in front of stunned witnesses. Police noted Sylvester's ties to local gangs, and many believe the hit was gang-related retaliation, but with no arrests ever made, the case remains officially unsolved. On August 4th, 2026, celebrity blogger Perez Hilton was hospitalized after live streaming an apparent mental health crisis from his South Florida home. During the disturbing broadcast, Hilton appeared completely covered in blood and seemingly harmed himself as horrified viewers contacted authorities, while TikTok also reportedly alerted police after detecting the live stream. Even more disturbing, Hilton's 3 children had reportedly been inside the home shortly before the crisis. His sister and niece realized something was seriously wrong and fled with the children only minutes before the live stream began. Police arrived around 7 p.m., but rather than immediately entering the home, spent nearly 4 hours attempting to de-escalate the situation out of concern that a confrontation could potentially provoke a suicide by cops scenario. Hilton was eventually taken to a hospital and placed under Florida's Baker Act for psychiatric evaluation. The incident followed an already brutal year for the famous blogger. Months earlier, Perez spent 21 days hospitalized after a perforated ulcer led to severe sepsis, and soon afterward, doctors discovered a massive blood clot in his leg requiring emergency surgery. A few weeks before the live stream, Hilton also publicly admitted he was in a spiral and felt overwhelmed after moving back to Miami, a city he's reportedly associated with traumatic memories, including witnessing his father and grandfather dying just a week apart when he was younger. As of the latest update, Hilton remains hospitalized and receiving treatment, with his family saying he's safe, able to communicate, and surrounded by loved ones, while asking the public to respect his privacy as he recovers. Greg Sippis, the longtime voice of Beast Boy in Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, revealed in February 2025 that he'd been diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease. According to Sippis, less than a day after publicly announcing his diagnosis, Warner Bros. Fired him from the role he had voiced for more than 2 decades. He later claimed the studio didn't have patience for his Parkinson's symptoms, saying sometimes he just needed extra time or additional takes while recording. Sippis said being replaced by someone mimicking the voice he created felt like having part of his identity stolen. Warner Bros. Has disputed this account, saying the recasting was based on performance and creative concerns rather than his Parkinson's. Waitress Melina Salazar spent over 7 years serving one of the most difficult customers at a cafe in Texas. 89-year-old World War II veteran Walter Buck Swords, who was notorious for cursing at staff, demanding his food be piping hot and never leaving a tip. Salazar was reportedly the only waitress willing to consistently serve him, patiently putting up with his rude behavior for years. But when Swords died in 2007, she learned he'd secretly left her $50,000 in his will along with his car, as a final thank you for putting up with him and the kindness she had shown him when no one else would. In 2008, 2 high school dropouts from Calabasas discovered Paris Hilton kept a spare key under her doormat and burglarized her $6 million mansion 5 separate times before she even realized anything was missing. Their group, later dubbed the Bling Ring, targeted celebrities they tracked through gossip websites and social media, ultimately stealing an estimated $3 million worth of cash, jewelry, designer clothing, and luxury watches from stars including Lindsay Lohan, Orlando Bloom, and Megan Fox, before police finally unraveled the spree and arrested the crew. Between 2011 and 2012, a group of thieves pulled off one of the strangest heists in Canadian history, stealing nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup worth over $18 million from a warehouse in Quebec. They siphoned the syrup out of the official barrels belonging to the province's maple syrup reserve and quietly refilled them with water to hide the theft. The scheme went unnoticed for months until a routine inspection revealed the barrels were suspiciously light. The investigation led to multiple arrests and exposed a black market syrup operation that was much bigger than anyone could have ever expected. Kimbo Slice rose from viral backyard street fights to become one of the most recognizable names in combat sports, turning his YouTube fame into careers in MMA, boxing, and the UFC. But just months after his final fight, he was rushed to a Florida hospital, suffering from severe abdominal pain, nausea, and shortness of breath. Doctors discovered his body was completely shutting down. He was in advanced congestive heart failure, his kidneys had failed bad enough to require dialysis, and a mass had been found on his liver. Although no official cause was announced for why his health had deteriorated so rapidly, he was placed on the waiting list for an emergency heart transplant. Just 3 days after being admitted, Kimbo died at the age of 42, leaving behind 6 children. After becoming an international superstar with her 1990 hit Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor's career became overshadowed by controversy following her infamous 1992 appearance on Saturday Night Live, where she tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II to protest child abuse within the Catholic Church. She was widely criticized at the time, and the backlash permanently damaged her career. Over the following decades, she spoke openly about living with mental illness, struggled with periods of severe depression, and faced repeated personal hardships. In 2022, her 17-year-old son died by suicide after going missing, a tragedy she described as completely devastating. Just over a year later, in 2023, O'Connor was found dead in her London apartment at the age of 56. A coroner later determined she had died of natural causes. During the recent earthquakes in Venezuela, security cameras captured a terrifying race against time. Several people can be seen sprinting down the final flights of stairs as the building starts shaking violently. Seconds later, the entire structure starts collapsing behind them, reducing it to a massive pile of rubble as they escaped by mere moments. The powerful earthquakes caused widespread devastation across the country, destroying thousands of buildings and leaving more than 1,000 people dead, with many more displaced or injured. This was the moment a man was in serious danger of becoming a polar bear's next meal. After spotting the massive predator charging toward him, he sprinted for his snowmobile as the bear rapidly closed the distance. Just as he managed to start the engine, the roar of the snowmobile made the bear hesitate for just a split second. That brief pause gave him just enough time to speed away to safety. Polar bears are the only bears known to actively stalk and hunt humans as prey, making encounters like this among the most dangerous in the animal kingdom. This was the moment a Utah driver's life was instantly put in danger. A pickup truck rear-ended the SUV at a railroad crossing, pushing it onto the tracks at the worst time possible. As the crossing arms came down, the driver tried to reverse but got stuck. Footage showed the conductor wailing on the horn and hitting the emergency brakes, but there was no way to stop in time. With the massive train rapidly approaching, the driver had no choice but to abandon the vehicle and run. Moments later, the train slammed into it, instantly destroying the car and causing over $100,000 in damage. Police later cited the pickup truck for following too closely, saying the entire incident began with the rear-end collision. This man was trying to close a metal gate when something went horribly wrong. As he pulled the two metal doors together, an electrical fault had apparently energized the gate, electrocuting him immediately. Unable to let go, he remained stuck to the gate as electricity coursed through his body. Luckily, his coworker realized what was happening and quickly drop-kicked him away from the gate, instead of grabbing him directly, which could have gotten them both electrocuted. Amazingly, the man survived. If his friend hesitated for even a few more seconds or approached the situation any differently, the outcome most likely would have been much worse. In 2001, 28-year-old physician Andrew Bagby ended his relationship with his girlfriend, Dr. Shirley Turner, after becoming convinced she was unstable and fearing for his own safety. Days later, Turner lured him to a Pennsylvania park under the pretense of talking, then shot him 5 times before leaving his body in the woods. After fleeing to Canada, Turner announced she was pregnant with Andrew's son, Zachary. Despite being charged with Andrew's murder, she was repeatedly granted bail, allowing her to keep custody of the baby while Andrew's grieving parents spent over a year trying to fight the courts to protect him. On August 18, 2003, just days after a judge ruled that Zachary should be placed in his grandparents' care, Turner sedated the 13-month-old with drugs, strapped him to her body, and took both of their lives. A public inquiry later concluded that Zachary's death was preventable, and that authorities had repeatedly ignored clear warning signs. The case later led to child protection reforms in Canada known as Zachary's Bill. Andrew's best friend had originally begun filming a documentary so that Zachary would one day know how great of a person his father was. But after Zachary was tragically killed, the project transformed into Dear Zachary, a devastating true crime documentary chronicling one of the most heartbreaking murder cases. In 2012, an Icelandic TV station accidentally aired an episode of the Teletubbies with subtitles from HBO's The Sopranos, leaving children watching cheerful characters while captions referenced murder, dead dogs, drugs, and impotence. The bizarre mix-up was spotted by an adult viewer who photographed the screen before the broadcast ended. Just months later, the channel shut down completely and its archives were destroyed, meaning the original footage is believed to have disappeared forever. Today, only a few blurry photos remain as evidence that the surreal broadcast ever happened. Just 7 days after being released from prison, Aaron Tucker had less than $2 to his name and was on his way to a life-changing job interview when he watched a car flip over and begin filling with smoke. Knowing the bus would leave without him and he'd miss the interview, he ran off anyway, pulled the badly injured 61-year-old driver from the wreck moments before it caught fire, and used his own dress shirt to stop the man's bleeding. Tucker missed the interview but saved the stranger's life, and after his story went viral, donations topped $50,000 within days, and employers lined up to offer him a second chance. You may have this extremely rare eye condition without even realizing it. Visual snow is a neurological condition where a constant layer of flickering static fills a person's entire field of vision, often described like television noise that never turns off. For years, it was thought to be extremely rare, partly because many sufferers never reported it, believing their vision was normal. Only recently has it been more widely recognized as visual snow syndrome, with researchers linking it to abnormal activity in the brain's visual processing areas rather than problems with the eyeballs themselves. There's currently no known cure, though some treatments may help reduce symptoms for certain patients. Some people live with the condition for decades before realizing that what they see is not how most people experience the world. Xenoturbella is a simple deep-sea organism that has no brain, no eyes, and no clearly defined organ, consisting mostly of a soft, ciliated body with a single opening used for both feeding and waste. First discovered in the 1900s, it puzzled scientists for decades because its anatomy is so minimal that researchers struggled to classify it, with debates still continuing over where it fits on the evolutionary tree. It survives by ingesting tiny organic material on the ocean floor, and for many researchers, it appears to exist for no clear reason. Here's a friendly reminder of why you should always lock your doors no matter what. This disturbing ring camera footage shows a disheveled woman wearing a white dress wandering through a residential stairway in the middle of the night while holding a knife in her mouth. She paces back and forth, systematically trying apartment doors, stopping at each one to see if it's unlocked. When she realizes they're locked, she bends down and checks under the doormats, clearly searching for hidden spare keys before moving on to the next door. She even stares directly into the camera while moving from door to door, seemingly unaware or unconcerned by how terrifying she looks. Still armed, she walks up the stairs to another floor and continues scanning hallways, before reportedly lingering outside more apartments as the video cuts off. Her appearance, combined with the fact that she was half-dressed and carrying a knife in her mouth, made many people fear that she wasn't simply trespassing, but was potentially on drugs or mentally ill while actively looking for someone to hurt, showing how close a single unlocked door can come to turning into something far worse. They thought she was just a sweet, innocent grandma, but behind her front door was pure horror. In the 1980s, California woman Dorothea Puente used her Sacramento boarding house as a hunting ground for the vulnerable. She took in the elderly, the homeless, alcoholics, and people with mental illness, those with monthly government checks and no family to worry about them. Once they trusted her, she allegedly drugged them with heavy sedatives, suffocated them in their sleep, and buried them in her backyard like garbage. Tenants began mysteriously disappearing, but Puente kept cashing their social security payments and forging signatures as if they were still alive. Neighbors complained of a foul stench and constant digging in her yard, but police believed her every time she claimed the tenants had simply moved out. In 1988, police finally searched her property and dug up body after body, unearthing 7 decomposing corpses hidden in shallow graves. Even then, Puente was so calm and grandmotherly that officers let her step outside to get coffee, and she fled the state. After a nationwide manhunt, she was caught and eventually linked to at least 9 murders, though many believe the real number was far higher. At age 15, David Bowie was punched in the eye by his best friend during a fight over a girl, causing serious damage to his vision and leaving his pupil permanently dilated. The injury gave him his iconic mismatched stare, but also left him nearly half blind, with blurred vision and terrible depth perception for the rest of his life. In Florida, a rescued otter named Splashed is being trained to sniff out human remains underwater. Unlike cadaver dogs, he can dive into murky waters where bodies are often impossible to find, sometimes because alligators drag corpses away and jam them under logs to hide them for later feeding. Splash can follow the scent through the water and mark the exact location. In 2020, 89-year-old British beekeeper Ron Hoskins lost everything in a suspected arson attack. For 2 decades, he'd been breeding super bees resistant to deadly mites, hoping to save collapsing bee populations worldwide. But vandals suddenly torched his greenhouse and shed, destroying his microscopes, generators, protective suits, and years of meticulous breeding records, while also wrecking dozens of hives containing the very colonies he had developed. Despite a police appeal for witnesses, no suspects were ever found, and in a single night, his life's mission to protect the future of bees was reduced to ashes by perpetrators that remain unknown. China's developing a humanoid robot that can carry a fetus in an artificial womb, where the baby would float in synthetic fluids, sustained by nutrient tubes and monitored by sensors, before being expelled by hydraulics at birth. The first prototype is planned for 2026, priced around $14,000, and will give people the chance to have children without enduring the risks or pain of pregnancy. Supporters argue it could help women who can't safely carry babies, but critics warn it strips away the human bond of gestation and could mark the beginning of childbirth being outsourced to machines. In 1988, Clarence Moses L. was sentenced to 48 years in prison after a rape victim told police that she saw his face in a dream and decided that he was the attacker. No physical evidence tied him to the crime, and police even destroyed the DNA that could have proven his innocence. For nearly 3 decades, he sat behind bars while the real rapist walked free until that man finally confessed. But by then, Clarence had already lost 28 years of his life to a conviction built on nothing more than a dream. While filming the Season 4 It's Always Sunny episode, The Gang Solves the Gas Crisis, Caitlin Olsen was accidentally waterboarded by Danny DeVito for real. The crew thought a piece of wetsuit material over her face would protect her, but water still seeped through, leaving her genuinely choking and gasping for air in a true torture simulation. To make matters worse, Olsen had just recently broken her back after being dropped onto concrete during a 4th of July accident, and she filmed the scene strapped to a board with her weight pressing against the healing injury. She now calls it one of the 3 worst days of her life. At a restaurant in California, a 2-year-old was accidentally served cooking wine that was mislabeled as apple juice. Moments later, she began staggering, slurring her words, and even fell over, until a blood test revealed a 0.12% BAC, well over the legal limit to drive. In 2023, repeat offender Thomas Allen McCartney was captured after assaulting a 7-year-old in Louisiana. Under a new state law, he accepted a plea deal of 40 years in prison plus surgical and chemical castration, making him one of the first Americans subjected to court-ordered sterilization. In 1997, 18-year-old Natasha Cornett and 5 friends turned a road trip into one of Tennessee's darkest crimes. At a rest stop, they encountered the Llewellyn family and decided that they wanted to steal their car, so they forced them into their own van at gunpoint. On a remote back road, the family was lined up in a ditch and shot execution style. The parents died instantly. Their little girl clung to life for a day before succumbing to her wounds, and the toddler somehow survived but was left blind in one eye and permanently disabled. When investigators arrived, they found the family's bloodied Bible left open in the grass and tiny children's shoes scattered at the scene, with one officer describing it as one of the most horrifying crime scenes he had ever witnessed. The killers fled in the family's van hoping to reach Mexico, but were captured within days. Cornett, who later called herself the daughter of Satan and believed that he would spare her, instead learned she was powerless, condemned to life without parole alongside her accomplices. In case you don't feel like watching the whole documentary, here are some morbid facts about Ed Gein. Ed Gein is one of the most disturbing killers in American history, not because of how many people he killed, but because of what police found inside of his farmhouse. Although he was only confirmed to have murdered 2 women, he spent years digging up corpses of women who looked like his mother, whom he was obsessed with, and bringing them home to turn their bodies into art pieces. When investigators entered his home, they found a nightmarish scene straight out of a horror movie. Bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, masks of faces peeled from corpses hung on the walls, a box filled with severed noses, and even lips nailed to a window shade pull cord. He had a belt made of nipples and made corsets and leggings out of human skin, all part of his plan to build a full woman suit so he could wear it and become his dead mother. Ed even admitted he tried to dig up his own mother's corpse, but gave up because she was too heavy. One of his 2 victims, Bernice Warden's body, was found hanging upside down in his shed, gutted like a deer, and police also discovered a human heart in a paper bag near the stove because he wanted to cook it later. Neighbors later reported seeing a strange female figure dancing in the moonlight on his property, most likely Gein wearing one of his skin suits outside. The horror was so extreme that multiple officers who investigated his farmhouse quit the force from trauma, and despite his house being a rotting, corpse-filled disaster, he kept his mother's bedroom pristine and untouched like a shrine. Perhaps the most chilling part of all was that the townspeople thought he was completely harmless. He babysat their kids and did chores while secretly wearing the dead in his spare time. Declared insane rather than executed, he lived quietly in a mental institution doing arts and crafts with paper instead of human body parts, until his death when people robbed his grave and stole his headstone as a trophy. Ed Gein's crimes were so grotesque and twisted that he became the direct inspiration for characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, forever defining the skin-wearing, mother-obsessed killer in horror. In 1995, 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo from Brooklyn became the face of one of the most horrifying child abuse cases in New York history. After years of living safely with relatives, Elisa was placed back in the care of her biological mother, Awilda Lopez, despite repeated warnings from family members and school officials about ongoing abuse and neglect. Almost immediately, neighbors and teachers noticed that Elisa had changed. She often arrived at school bruised, withdrawn, and terrified to go home. Over the next year, Awilda subjected her daughter to relentless cruelty. Elisa was often locked in a dark room for hours, forced to eat scraps or nothing at all, and denied basic care. Witnesses later recalled hearing her cry for help through the walls, while her mother screamed insults and accused her of being evil. She was beaten repeatedly, forced to sleep on the floor, and frequently sent to school with visible marks that no one acted on. In November of 1995, the abuse reached its breaking point. Awilda slammed Elisa's head into a concrete wall, inflicting a massive head injury that caused fatal brain damage, and by the time paramedics arrived, she couldn't be saved. Autopsy findings revealed injuries consistent with chronic physical and sexual abuse, including genital trauma and signs of repeated violation. Awilda was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. After serving over 2 decades, she was released in April of 2022, a decision that reignited outrage among those who still remember Elisa's case. Her case horrified New Yorkers not just because of its brutality, but because it was preventable. Teachers, neighbors, and relatives had all tried to report what was happening, yet every warning was ignored. In the aftermath, the city passed Elisa's law, aimed at preventing child welfare agencies from concealing such failures ever again. This was the moment when a pool cleaner spotted everyone's worst nightmare at the bottom of a backyard pool: the family dog completely motionless. The dog likely snuck into the pool area when the man opened the gate and fell in without anyone noticing. Luckily, the cleaner didn't hesitate, jumping straight into the water and dragging the lifeless dog to the surface before immediately starting chest compressions on the patio. After nearly a minute of desperate attempts to revive the dog, he suddenly gasped, coughed up water, and came back to life. A clutch rescue that hopefully earned the pool cleaner a decent tip. This woman is lucky to be alive after a cassowary casually walked up to her on a quiet beach, a bird often called the world's most dangerous for a reason. Native to parts of Oceania, cassowaries have dagger-like claws that can easily disembowel you with a single kick, and they've been responsible for multiple serious injuries and even fatal attacks when people panic or get too close. But this woman did the right thing by staying calm, since cassowaries are most aggressive when they feel threatened or startled. By remaining still and non-threatening, she kept the encounter from escalating into the type of attack the species is infamous for. This was the moment an airport security worker in the Philippines swallowed $300 in cash to avoid being arrested. The money had allegedly been taken from a passenger's bag during a routine screening, and when the traveler reported it missing, airport staff confronted the employee as cameras were rolling. Her bizarre attempt to hide the evidence quickly went viral online, prompting officials to suspend her from duty while an investigation moved forward. Here's the before and after of an imperial crown left mangled following the 2025 Louvre heist, where thieves forced it through a narrow slit cut into its reinforced display case, crushing the delicate gold frame as they pulled it free. During the escape, the damaged crown was dropped just outside of the museum and quickly recovered by authorities, though it had been badly deformed from being forced out and striking the ground. The Louvre has since formed a restoration committee and begun seeking proposals to fix it, with early estimates starting around $50,000, though officials say the real cost will come from the painstaking hours of delicate repair needed to rebuild the 170-year-old piece. In 2001, U.S. border agents at the Mexican border discovered 42-year-old Enrique Aguilar Canchola sitting inside a hollowed-out passenger seat that had been modified to look completely normal. He'd been sewn into the seat to sneak into the U.S. undetected, but agents noticed the seat looked unusually bulky and pulled the car aside. Canchola was immediately arrested along with the driver. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company to expose corrupt politicians, and 25% of the congressmen who were offered bribes accepted them, leading to multiple convictions in one of the largest stings in U.S. history. In 2025, South Carolina teaching assistant Alexander Lewis was arrested after repeatedly spraying a powerful fart spray inside of West Florence High School, triggering nausea, headaches, and respiratory issues among students and staff. The odor contaminated parts of the building's ventilation system, forcing inspections and cleanup that totaled more than $55,000 in damage. Lewis was charged with disturbing schools and malicious injury to property, turning what he thought was a harmless prank into one of the most expensive school incidents of the year. In Ottawa, Canada in 2012, staff at the Conservative Party of Canada's headquarters called police after discovering a package emitting a foul odor. Party official Jenny Byrne had unknowingly handled the contents, which investigators later determined was a decomposing human foot belonging to Jun Lin, a Chinese international student who'd been murdered and dismembered by Luca Minata in Montreal, Quebec. Several other body parts were mailed to political offices and schools across Canada before Minata fled the country. He was later captured in Berlin, Germany, convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. In South River, New Jersey, 49-year-old Anna Amato was arrested after allegedly posing as a dentist and performing dental work without a license. She reportedly advertised cheap procedures in WhatsApp group chats and agreed to perform a $1,000 root canal on a patient. After injecting anesthetic and drilling into the man's tooth, she suddenly stopped mid-procedure and told him to come back later. Days afterwards, she admitted she couldn't finish the root canal and suggested he see a real dentist instead. The patient later went to police with gauze in his mouth and still bleeding in excruciating pain after she allegedly refused to refund his $300 deposit. Investigators soon discovered Amato was never licensed to practice dentistry, and she was arrested in February of 2026 on charges including aggravated assault and impersonating a dentist. In July of 2016, 17-year-old Mike Mansholt suddenly disappeared while exploring ancient catacombs on the island of Malta. 5 days later, his body was found at the base of a cliff, and investigators initially believed he had died in a fall, but the autopsy revealed disturbing inconsistencies. Despite the apparent fall, he had no broken bones, and examiners found that his internal organs were missing, removed through a large opening in the abdomen. Authorities were never able to explain how the organs were removed or what happened to them, leaving the circumstances of his death deeply unsettling and unresolved. Rape-kun was a Humboldt penguin at the Tobu Zoo in Japan, whose longtime mate Midori eventually left him for a younger penguin, leaving him largely isolated from the rest of the colony. But in 2017, the zoo placed cardboard cutouts of characters from the anime Kimono Zoo around the park, including one of Halulu, an anthropomorphic Humboldt penguin, inside his enclosure. Visitors soon noticed Rape-kun repeatedly standing next to the cutout for long periods, and even displaying what appeared to be courtship behavior toward it. Photos of the unusual bond soon went viral online, and the zoo eventually decided to leave the cutout inside the enclosure for him. Rape-kun died a few months later at about 21 years old, with the cardboard character still standing by his side. This was the shocking moment when an MLB pitcher realized his life was over. Former Red Sox pitcher Austin Maddox went from a World Series ring holder to a child predator after he was arrested in Florida in 2024. Investigators say he believed he was talking to a 14-year-old girl, unaware the teen was actually an undercover detective. When he arrived at the meeting place, officers pounced on him before he could even walk through the front door and arrested him immediately. The report says he had driven there intending to meet a teenage girl, part of a wider operation targeting child predators. Maddox was charged with multiple felonies and later sentenced to 3 years in prison, his mugshot replacing whatever was left of his brief baseball career. A man in Mantua, Italy is under investigation after police discovered he had kept his mother's corpse hidden inside their home ever since she died in 2022. He never reported her death. Instead, he placed her body in a sleeping bag in the laundry room where it eventually mummified. Over the next 3 years, he continued collecting her pension, pulling in tens of thousands of euros annually. When her ID expired in 2025, he tried to renew it by dressing up in a wig, makeup, and his late mother's clothes, hoping to pass as her. But staff grew suspicious of his deep voice and masculine features and alerted police immediately. Authorities compared photos, searched the home, and found the mummified remains, leading to charges for fraud, identity theft, and concealing a corpse. Here's some incredible footage of a black tiger marking its territory, one of the rarest big cat mutations on Earth. These so-called black tigers aren't truly melanistic, but carry a genetic glitch that thickens their stripes and darkens their coat until they look almost entirely black. Only a handful of them have ever been documented, nearly all from India's Similipal Tiger Reserve for reasons unknown to researchers across the world. Seeing a rhino with its full horn intact is becoming increasingly rare due to poaching. So many rhinos have been killed for their horns that conservation teams now remove them preemptively, making a full-grown one extremely uncommon. This colorized footage of Jerusalem in 1897 is the closest thing we have to a working time machine. This rarely seen deep-sea creature known as an oarfish washed ashore in Mexico earlier this year. Oarfish normally live thousands of feet beneath the surface and can grow up to 30 feet long, which is why their sudden beachings have fueled legends across the world for centuries. Their serpent-like bodies have inspired old nautical tales of sea monsters, and in Japan they're known as messengers from the sea god, believed to appear before major disasters. In 1935, Ann Cooper Hewitt, daughter of wealthy inventor Peter Cooper Hewitt, checked into a San Francisco hospital for what she believed was a simple appendectomy, but woke up unknowingly sterilized. Her own mother had secretly convinced the surgeons to tie her fallopian tubes while she was under anesthesia. The motive was pure greed. Anne's father's will stated that if she ever had children, she would inherit millions. But if she died childless, her fortune would revert to her mother. To secure the money, her mother permanently destroyed her ability to have children, then tried to justify it by calling Anne mentally unfit and promiscuous. Anne later sued in one of the most shocking court cases of the 1930s, but despite national outrage, the criminal charges were quietly dropped. The case was settled in private, and Anne's mother never spent a single day in prison. For the rest of her life, Anne struggled deeply with depression and died at just 40 years old, while her mother outlived her by more than a decade and died comfortably in 1969. In 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox left his home in Woodland Park, Colorado for a short walk and was never seen again. 7 years later, his mummified body was discovered inside the chimney of an abandoned cabin less than a mile from his house. He was found in a fetal position wearing only a thermal shirt with his other clothes neatly folded nearby. The coroner ruled his death an accident, suggesting he tried to enter the cabin through the chimney and became trapped. But the bizarre details, his position, the missing clothing, and the fact that the chimney was blocked off from the inside have fueled theories that Joshua didn't end up there by accident but was placed there by someone else. In 1930, a mannequin appeared in the window of a bridal shop in Chihuahua, Mexico, so lifelike that locals swore she wasn't made of wax at all. Her glass eyes, detailed hands, and visible veins fueled rumors that she was the embalmed body of the shop owner's daughter, a bride who died on her wedding day. Nicknamed La Pascualita, she's remained on display for nearly a century, still leaving visitors to wonder if they're looking at a mannequin or a corpse in a wedding dress. In 2015, 20-year-old Lauren Bunner took his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Jolie Callan, hiking at Mount Cheaha, the highest point in Alabama. Just before sunset, he took a haunting photo of her taking in the view at the edge of a cliff, completely unaware it would be the last thing she ever saw. Moments later, he shot her twice in the head before pushing her body off the mountain. Bunner later called 911 and calmly confessed, claiming it was part of a suicide pact he couldn't go through with, but investigators found no trace of such an agreement. It was premeditated murder, and in 2017, Bunner was sentenced to 52 years in prison for killing the girl he once called the love of his life. In 2009, Michelle Fox was accidentally shot in the face by her husband while he handled a loaded shotgun. The blast destroyed almost everything. She lost both her eyes, nose, and entire upper palate. Surgeons couldn't fully rebuild her, so they created a custom magnetic prosthetic face made from silicone and acrylic that literally snaps onto metal implants in her skull. She now lives every day with part of her face detachable, a tragic reminder of how one careless moment can erase your identity in a split second. During the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises in Aurora, Colorado, a 24-year-old shooter entered the packed theater through an emergency exit wearing full body armor, tossed gas canisters into the crowd, and opened fire with an AR-15, a shotgun, and a Glock. In just 90 seconds, he fired more than 70 rounds, killing 12 and injuring dozens more as movie sound effects mixed with real screams. Among the victims was Alex Sullivan, celebrating his 27th birthday and first wedding anniversary, Jessica Gawi, a 24-year-old reporter who'd narrowly escaped a Toronto mall shooting just weeks earlier, and 6-year-old Veronica Moser, who was killed instantly beside her 25-year-old mother, Ashley. Ashley was shot in the neck and abdomen, left paralyzed, and lost her unborn baby, later waking up in the hospital repeatedly asking where Veronica was, not realizing she was gone. The shooter was found calmly waiting outside, calling himself the Joker, while police discovered his apartment rigged with explosives meant to kill the investigators who entered. His notebook revealed a cold plan to maximize casualties, as he was sentenced to 12 life terms plus 3,300 years, but survivors say no punishment could ever possibly match the horror inflicted on that night. MF Doom, the masked supervillain of hip-hop, died in a way just as mysterious as the persona he created. On Halloween Day in 2020, he passed away at 49, but his death was kept completely secret for 62 days. For 2 months, fans continued listening to his music and waiting for new projects, unaware that he was already gone. Then on New Year's Eve, his wife quietly announced his passing, but gave no cause of death or any further details. To this day, the circumstances remain undisclosed, sparking endless speculation. It felt strangely fitting. Doom built his entire identity around mystery and anonymity, sometimes even sending imposters to perform in his place. In the end, he died on Halloween, vanished in silence, and left behind one final mystery. In 1929, 6-year-old Carl Newton Mahan became the youngest person in American history to be charged with murder, then sat in a courtroom playing with a doll. The Kentucky boy had gotten into a fight with an 8-year-old named Cecil Van Hoos over a piece of scrap metal. Cecil reportedly slapped him, so Carl ran home, grabbed his father's shotgun, and blasted the older boy, killing him instantly. Because of the shocking nature of the crime, Carl was actually put on trial for murder, sitting in the courtroom so young that they had to give him toys to keep him calm. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in reform school, but the conviction was quickly overturned due to public outrage. While on his way to Toronto to film the second season of Gen V in March of 2024, actor Chance Perdomo tragically died in a single-vehicle motorcycle crash at just 27 years old. Authorities confirmed no other vehicles were involved, but never released the exact location, cause of the crash, weather condition, or road details, leaving the true circumstances unknown. Because he died alone, there were no public witnesses and no full incident report, sparking endless speculation among fans. Eerily, just days before the accident, he posted a photo of his motorcycle on Instagram with the ominous caption, "The final calm before the storm." His death impacted Gen V so heavily that production was postponed, and instead of recasting his character, the writers rewrote the entire season around his absence, a rare move that shows just how important and irreplaceable he was as an actor. In 1996, a stray mother cat in New York City became famous for performing one of the most heroic acts in animal rescue history. When the abandoned garage she and her newborn kittens were living in caught fire, she ran through the flames 5 separate times, carrying each kitten out one by one. By the time she saved the last one, her eyes were blistered shut, her ears and paws were burned, and her fur was scorched. But she touched each kitten with her nose to make sure they were all alive before collapsing unconscious. Nicknamed Scarlet, she later recovered at a veterinary hospital and was reunited with her kittens, all of whom survived. The story went viral worldwide, and the mother cat and all 5 of her babies were eventually adopted into loving homes. During the War on Terror, U.S. interrogators turned to music as a weapon, blasting songs on endless repeat in secret detention sites. Among the most infamous tracks was Eminem's The Real Slim Shady, which detainees reported being forced to hear non-stop for up to 20 days. Former prisoners described the experience as so unbearable that men would scream, weep, and even bang their heads against the walls for hours just to escape the sound, a form of psychological torment that left no physical scars but shattered minds. In January of 2022, shoppers at a Walmart in Crockett, Texas witnessed a bizarre and disturbing encounter. A woman named Rebecca Lynette Taylor approached a mother with an infant son and casually offered her $250,000 in cash to purchase the child. When the stunned mother refused and tried to leave, Rebecca allegedly followed her into the parking lot, doubling her offer to $500,000 and insisting she'd wanted to purchase the boy for a long time. Terrified, the mother contacted police and Rebecca was arrested and charged with the felony offense of sale or purchase of a child. In May of 2025, 46-year-old Christy Crampton was arrested after a disturbing in-flight altercation with a child who allegedly called her fat and Miss Piggy. The two were returning from a trip to Disney World when the situation suddenly spiraled out of control. Witnesses say Crampton began striking the boy with her fists and a water bottle, even slamming his head against the airplane window. When questioned, she told police the child had been disrespectful and had pushed her arm away before she snapped. One witness told investigators the woman wasn't correcting the child, she was abusing him. Crampton was charged with felony child abuse and released on bond, while the child's identity, relation to her, and condition were not disclosed. Before gunning down Mahatma Gandhi in 1948, his assassin Nathuram Godse had already tried to kill him twice before. In 1944, he led a group that charged Gandhi with knives during a prayer meeting, and later that year, he confronted him again wielding a dagger. Both times he was caught but released. Gandhi, committed to his philosophy of nonviolence and forgiveness, reportedly refused to press charges. That mercy would prove fatal just 4 years later when Godse finally succeeded in his third attempt, firing 3 bullets into the man who who preached nothing but peace. In the early 1930s, New York high society had an unlikely new it girl, a mannequin named Cynthia. Designed by artist Lester Gaba, she was so lifelike that designers dressed her in couture. She was photographed at parties and even received fan mail like a real celebrity. For years, people treated her like she was actually alive. But in 1938, Cynthia toppled from a chair and shattered into pieces, and newspapers reported her death with obituaries as though a beloved socialite had just passed away. In the early 1980s, Minneapolis was haunted by the weepy-voiced killer, a man who routinely phoned police after his murders, sobbing and begging them to stop him. For years, his trembling voice was the only lead. That changed in 1982 when he lured sex worker Denise Williams into his car and stabbed her 15 times with a screwdriver. But Williams fought back, smashing a glass bottle over his head and escaping. Bleeding and panicked, he later called 911 for medical help, and detectives immediately recognized the same weepy voice from the anonymous murder call. He was identified as Paul Michael Stefani and sentenced to life. In July of 2021, police in Essex, Maryland pulled over 33-year-old Nicole Johnson during a routine traffic stop, only to uncover something absolutely horrific. Officers noticed a stench of decomposition and maggots crawling from a bag inside her car. When they searched the trunk, Johnson pulled back a blanket to reveal the remains of her 7-year-old niece Jocelyn and her 5-year-old nephew Larry. Investigators later learned the children had been dead for months, Jocelyn for over a year. The woman admitted she had beaten the children to death, stuffed them into garbage bags, and left them in the car. Instead of calling authorities, Johnson went on with her life and drove around for months with both corpses in her trunk. The children had been left in her custody after their mother disappeared in 2019, but Johnson quickly subjected them to fatal abuse and neglect. Nicole was eventually sentenced to 50 years in prison for the gruesome crimes. After retiring from the NFL in 1990, Hall of Famer Mike Webster's life unraveled into a spiral of bizarre and disturbing behavior. Once celebrated as the Iron Man of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he spent his final years homeless or sleeping in his pickup truck, suffering crushing headaches, dementia, and paranoia. Friends and family later described shocking habits, urinating in his own oven, shocking himself with a taser just to fall asleep, and gluing his decaying teeth back together. At one point, he even carried around a briefcase filled with superglue, painkillers, and duct tape, using them as makeshift tools to hold his broken body together. By the time he died of a heart attack in 2002 at just 50 years old, Webster's decline had become a cautionary tale of the hidden costs of football. When doctors examined his brain, they discovered the first confirmed case of CTE in an NFL player, proof of how the game had slowly destroyed him from the inside out. Patrice O'Neal was a renowned stand-up comedian known for his sharp, unfiltered style on stage and appearances on Chappelle's Show, Opie and Anthony, and the Comedy Central roasts. He first discovered he had diabetes after a girlfriend told him his urine tasted like birthday cake, prompting him to get tested. The disease slowly wore him down over the years until in October of 2011, he suffered a massive stroke. Just a month later, at 41 years old, he died from complications, with his final television appearance being the roast of Charlie Sheen. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the heat was so intense it didn't just kill people. It completely warped human remains in ways rarely seen throughout history. In Herculaneum, archaeologists discovered the body of a young man lying face down on a wooden bed whose brain had literally been turned into glass. What you're looking at in this photo is brain tissue that was flash heated to nearly 1,000 degrees before cooling so rapidly it vitrified, leaving behind a shiny glass-like substance. It remains one of the only known cases of a human brain preserved through such a gruesome transformation. In 2012, two 13-year-old boys in Wisconsin were apparently so desperate for pizza and weed that they resorted to something horrific. They lured one boy's 78-year-old great-grandmother into her garage and brutally attacked her with a hatchet and hammer, caving in her skull and leaving her to die on the cold floor. They then rifled through her purse, walking away with just $155, blood money that hours later they blew on pizza, marijuana, and video games, laughing as if nothing happened. Investigators described the scene as one of the most disturbing they'd ever witnessed. The frail woman's body left beaten and discarded over a sum barely worth a week's allowance. Both boys were quickly arrested, showed little remorse, and were sentenced to decades in prison, ensuring the rest of their youth would be spent behind bars. In January of 2022, beloved comedian Bob Saget was found dead in his Orlando hotel room just hours after performing stand-up. The autopsy revealed massive skull fractures and brain bleeding. injuries more consistent with a serious car crash than a simple fall. Investigators ruled it an accident, likely from hitting his head, dismissing it as minor and going to sleep unaware of the fatal damage. Even more tragic, just that morning, Bob had posted on Instagram about the show he'd done the night before, writing, "I'm back in comedy like I was when I was 26. I guess I'm finding my new voice and loving every moment of it." With no drugs or alcohol in his system and no signs of foul play, his sudden death at 65 left fans across the world completely stunned. In February of 2023, two notorious orcas named Port and Starboard went on a killing spree off the coast of South Africa, slaughtering at least 17 seven-gill sharks in a single day. When the shark carcasses washed ashore, researchers were stunned to find that each had been sliced open with eerie precision. Every single liver was gone, while the rest of the body was left behind. Orcas are known to favor shark livers for their high fat content, but the surgical accuracy of these attacks has cemented their reputation as the ocean's most ruthless predators. With the Powerball approaching $2 billion, let's take a look at why winning the lottery can actually ruin your life. In 2006, Florida truck driver Abraham Shakespeare struck it rich with a $30 million lottery win, but the fortune quickly drew endless requests for money from family and friends who were clearly taking advantage of him. By 2009, he had mysteriously vanished, and months later, his body was found buried beneath a concrete slab. Investigators later revealed that Dee Dee Moore, who had befriended him under the guise of helping manage his wealth, had instead stolen his money and orchestrated his murder. In 1999, a Florida waitress was tipped a lottery ticket and won $10 million from it. She was then sued by her colleagues for their share before being sued by the man who tipped her the ticket. That same week, she was kidnapped by her ex-husband and ended up shooting him in the chest when he threatened to kill her. She then spent the next 10 years fighting a legal battle against the IRS, which she eventually won. In 1978, psychologists performed a study to compare the happiness levels of lottery winners versus accident victims who suddenly became paraplegic. The study found that over time, the everyday happiness of lottery winners ended up being lower than the happiness of accident victims. In 1960, an Australian father won $3 million in the lottery and his photo was plastered all over the news. Soon afterwards, his 8-year-old son was kidnapped for ransom and eventually murdered. This forever changed Australian anonymity laws for lottery winners. In 1997, struggling father of 3 Billy Bob Harrell became a millionaire overnight after winning the $31 million jackpot in the Texas lottery. But as friends, family, and strangers continuously pressured him to share his fortune, Harrell's spending went out of control, eventually resulting in he and his wife's divorce. Only 2 years after winning the lottery, Harrell ended up taking his own life just a few days after telling his friend, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." In 1992, 16-year-old Suzanne Capper was lured to a house in Manchester by people she thought were her friends. But for nearly a week, they tortured and humiliated her, breaking her arm, pulling out her teeth, shaving her head, and scrubbing her skin off with a wire brush before forcing her into a bathtub of disinfectant. They blasted tapes of the movie Child's Play to torment her, then drove her to a field, doused her in gasoline, and set her on fire. Suzanne survived for long enough to name her attackers before dying in the hospital 4 days later. 6 people were convicted for the heinous crimes. 4 received life sentences, including 2 women who were just 17 and 18 at the time, while the 2 remaining men were given lengthy prison terms. In 2021, Miss Zhang from Weifang, China underwent a routine double eyelid cosmetic procedure, but during the operation, she felt extremely uncomfortable in her left eye, only to later discover that her eyeball had been accidentally sewn to the outer corner of her eyelid. Despite stitch removal, a thin thread-like tether still remained between her eyeball and eyelid. Attempts to surgically detach them failed, causing her eye to become inflamed and fused once again. She's now left with blurred vision and severely limited eye movement, able to move her eye only by turning her entire head. In December of 24, 46-year-old Nurhawati Zahora was ambushed by a 13-foot crocodile while washing her feet in murky Indonesian waters. The reptile quickly dragged her under in a brutal death roll, spilling her blood into the water as horrified villagers could only watch. Nearly an hour later, it resurfaced with her lifeless body clamped in its jaws, forcing locals to toss raw chickens into the water to distract it before they could recover her remains. Witnesses described the scene as worse than hell, and authorities later hunted down and shot the crocodile. In 2018, 41-year-old British traveler Amanda Gill died from diabetes complications while visiting Mexico. But when her body was flown back to the UK, her family made a horrific discovery. Her eyes, brain, heart, and other organs were missing, with only part of her lower bowel left intact. It's believed that police or hospital staff sold her organs to traffickers. This tragic gravestone from 1875 reads, Kate McCormick, seduced and pregnant by her father's friend. Unwed, she died from abortion, her only choice. Abandoned in life and death by family, with but a single rose from her mother. Buried only through the kindness of an unknown benefactor. Died February 1875, age 21. Victim of an unforgiving society. Have mercy on us. A 44-year-old man lived nearly a decade with a knife blade buried deep in his chest without even realizing it. He felt no pain, had no breathing problems, and seemed perfectly healthy, until strange pus suddenly began oozing from beneath his nipple. Doctors finally ran scans and discovered the blade had been lodged inside his body for 8 years since a stabbing, quietly encased inside of him. Doctors removed the rusted metal in a dramatic surgery, and he walked out of the hospital just 10 days later. YouTuber Benjamin Bennett built a cult following with his eerie project Sitting and Smiling. Hundreds of 4-hour videos where he sits cross-legged, staring at the camera with a fixed grin, never moving or speaking. What starts as harmless quickly turns unsettling, the smile morphing into something more of a mask. His commitment over the years has produced some rather disturbing moments. In one recording, someone apparently tries to break into his home, but Bennett continues to grin without moving, sending the intruder fleeing in fear. In another, he loses control of his bladder midstream but still doesn't break character, letting the accident happen as though it were irrelevant to the ritual. In perhaps the most disturbing case, he allegedly kept filming while his grandmother lay dying in the next room, the fixed smile never faltering even as tragedy was unfolding in his own home. He's never once broken character or explained why he does this, leaving behind thousands of hours of unsettling footage that's disturbed viewers online for years. On Thanksgiving Day in 1980, Priscilla Ford steered her Lincoln Continental onto a crowded Reno sidewalk, mowing down dozens of pedestrians because she claimed a voice in her head told her to, killing 6 people and injuring 23 more in the chaos. Later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, she showed no remorse in court, and though initially sentenced to death, her punishment was reduced to life in prison. Ford spent the next 25 years behind bars before dying there in 2005. In 2019, an obese, wheelchair-bound American passenger on an EVA air flight from Los Angeles to Taiwan totally humiliated the crew by demanding help in the restroom, then forcing a female flight attendant to wipe him after absolutely nuking the toilet. With the door open, he allegedly moaned in pleasure and urged her on, saying, "Deeper, deeper," while she carried out the degrading task. The incident sparked outrage in Taiwan, led to a fine against EVA Air for failing to protect its staff, and left the attendant in tears as she described the ordeal at a press conference. In 2018, a woman who'd been in a vegetative state for 14 years at Hacienda Healthcare gave birth unexpectedly, as staff had no idea she was even pregnant. DNA evidence later revealed she'd been raped by a nurse over several years. The nurse, Nathan Sutherland, pled guilty to sexual assault and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The case led to widespread reforms in how care facilities protect vulnerable patients. In April of 2024, 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens of Indiana died when his 340-pound foster mother, Jennifer Lee Wilson, pinned him to the floor with her whole body weight for 5 minutes as discipline. As Dakota screamed while gasping for air, she accused him of faking until he went limp, only then attempting CPR. Wilson was sentenced to 6 years in prison for reckless homicide, while it later emerged that Dakota had begged his neighbor to adopt him, saying his foster parents were abusive. John Jessup, a once respected politician in Indiana, did the unspeakable to his own daughter while celebrating her 21st birthday in Las Vegas. The former Hancock County Commissioner pleaded guilty to attempted sexual assault after allegedly getting his daughter extremely drunk before assaulting her back at their hotel. Prosecutors say Jessup provided her with multiple Long Island iced teas, took her to a strip club where she became so incapacitated she needed a wheelchair ride back to the hotel, and later assaulted her while she was unconscious. He was sentenced in 2025 to 6 to 25 years in prison, must register as a sex offender, and is barred from all contact with his daughter for life. In August of 2023, Lil Tay's Instagram suddenly announced that she and her brother had died, sparking worldwide shock online. But within a day, she appeared alive, calling the post a cruel hack. Meta confirmed her account had been compromised, but suspicions lingered. Tay publicly accused her estranged father of planting the hoax, while others believe her brother staged it for attention. Then in 2024, she revealed that she'd been diagnosed with an actual life-threatening heart tumor and underwent successful open heart surgery, posting photos from her hospital bed. In 1978, 22-year-old art student Harold Brown fell 324 feet, nearly 30 stories, through the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco after crawling into a ventilation shaft. A guard who witnessed the fall swore he heard Brown yelling "whoopee" on the way down, as if enjoying the plunge. Against all odds, Brown survived the impact on the concrete base with both legs shattered, kneecaps destroyed, and a crushed heel bone, but no internal injuries. Minutes later, he regained consciousness and shocked rescuers by singing Camptown Races as they carried him out. On Thanksgiving Day in 2022, a heartbreaking tragedy unfolded at the Albuquerque home of Carlin and Connie DeNeo. Carlin, a gentle and soft-spoken man who by all accounts would never hurt a fly, had been battling frontotemporal dementia, a degenerative brain disease that slowly erodes a person's sense of reality and control. In the weeks leading up to the incident, he'd been waking up in the middle of the night in a state of deep anxiety and confusion, often unable to recognize where he was or what was happening. On that devastating holiday morning, family members arrived to find Connie's body dismembered and Carlin severely injured from self-inflicted wounds. Though he admitted to the murder, it was painfully clear that he wasn't in his right mind, lost in the fog of a cruel illness that had taken over his thoughts and stripped him of reason. Friends and loved ones were left shattered, knowing this wasn't the man they knew, but the heartbreaking consequence of a disease that claimed them both. Carlin was taken into custody and charged with murder, but his health rapidly declined. Just 3 weeks later, he died in medical care. His final days spent in confusion, grief, and the fading remnants of a once peaceful life. Orlando Brown, who played Eddie Thomas on That's So Raven, has endured a bizarre and highly public downfall marked by addiction, homelessness, mental health struggles, and repeated run-ins with the law. Once a Disney Channel fan favorite, he's since been arrested for drug possession, faced assault charges, and made an infamous appearance on Dr. Phil, wearing eerie snake-eye contact lenses while making erratic statements. As his troubles have played out in a chaotic mix of arrests, unsettling public behavior, and strange interviews, friends and former colleagues have publicly expressed fear for his life. In 2004, Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, the great-grandson of Vincent van Gogh's brother, was murdered in Amsterdam for his film Submission, which criticized the treatment of women in Islam. His killer, a radical Islamist, shot him, stabbed him, and nearly decapitated him, leaving a knife in his chest with a note threatening the film's co-creator. Rebecca Sherrick has hyperthymesia, an extremely rare condition that lets her recall every single day of her life in vivid detail, even memories from infancy. While it may sound extraordinary, she describes it as a curse that she can't turn off. Every embarrassment, heartbreak, and trauma plays back in her mind as clearly as the day it happened, trapping her in moments that most people get to forget. Once Hollywood's ultimate action hero, Bruce Willis is now trapped in a devastating real-life decline. In 2022, he was diagnosed with aphasia, a disorder that stripped him of the ability to understand or speak language. And by 2023, his family revealed that it was the early stage of frontotemporal dementia, a rare and brutal brain disease that erodes memory, personality, and communication until the patient no longer recognizes their loved ones. On film sets before his retirement, Willis was already struggling. He needed lines fed through an earpiece, often forgot entire scenes, and at times fired prop guns without warning, all while being pushed into low-budget cameos that cashed in on his fading star power. Now at just 69, the man who once embodied invincibility in Die Hard is slowly being undone by his own brain, unable to even grasp that he was once one of Hollywood's most iconic stars, while his family prepares for the cruel reality of watching one of the most charismatic voices in cinema fall silent forever.